From points all over the metro, it's time for an OSU update. We're points all over the metro because it's a snow day. You know how it is outside. So we are coming to you remotely. I'm Jenny Carlson here at my house, joined by OSU beat writer Nathan Ruiz from up north. Hey, Nate, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. And Barry Trammell, my fellow columnist down at his home in Norman. Hey, Barry.
I'm trying to stay warm. I went out sledding today.
Ugh.
And it managed to not break any bones, so that's very good.
I actually have not stepped out the door yet, so I feel like I'm doing a good job of staying warm. But obviously, lots of stuff to talk about and lots of OSU basketball to talk about after Wednesday night's big win. We've seen the Cowboys beat good teams this year, Nathan, but here's another one. Notched another top 10 victory, this time against Texas Tech. You were there. Not many other people were because of this weather that we had come through Wednesday. But what was key in your mind to the Cowboys getting what is definitely a needed victory if they've got any hopes of the NCAA tournament? What happened on Wednesday night to get them to this point?
The key for them was really uncharacteristically good shooting. They haven't been a good shooting team all year long. Mike Boynton has kind of sworn repeatedly, I have a good shooting team. He sees it in practice. And Wednesday was the night where it actually showed on the court. Started early in the first half. OSU goes on a 14-0 run, makes its first 9 shots of the second half, including 6 3-pointers. That stretch there put OSU ahead, and they didn't look back. Texas Tech was able to fight back, got the score to as close as 4, but OSU was able to hold off, get that 79-71 win. Mike Boynton now has 5 victories over ranked teams in his first year. 3 against top teams. No OSU coach has gotten more than that ever. 3 top 10 wins is the most in OSU history, tying a record. So Boynton obviously doing a lot to get this team in a great position. Still fighting to that NCAA tournament for an NCAA tournament spot. Still in a position where it can get there. I think it still will probably take another 3 wins here, whether those come here to end the regular season or at some point in Kansas City in the Big 12 tournament. But OSU keeping its hopes alive last night. That's all you can really ask for. Boynton kind of set themselves up last night as saying, we view these last 4 games as a 4-game season, and we made it through game 1. So they head to Austin on Saturday to take on Texas, another team that's trying to make the NCAA tournament. It's probably on the outside looking in right now. So a big game for both teams in terms of NCAA tournament hopes.
Yeah, but the way things are looking right now, Barry, if you're Oklahoma State and you're thinking, 4-game season, Saturday is game 2 of that season. Texas is they look like they're in a lot worse shape than Oklahoma State. If you look at, their offensive output against K-State was pitiful, really settling, sort of lazy basketball. I mean, I don't know if you can pin it all on sort of one game, but when you look at where these 2 teams are heading into this Saturday game, it seems like Oklahoma State's at least in a better spot with the way they're playing right now.
Well, I guess, but I mean, we're talking really about one game. Mm-hmm. Cowboys are so hot and cold. What we saw out of them a week ago. Again, was it a week ago when they hosted Kansas State? Got the doors blown off. TCU, not very good. Road trip to Fort Worth. You just don't know what you're going to get. But clearly, what they showed last night was high-level play. I thought it was the best 3 minutes that the Cowboys had played all season when they went on that 14-0 run. Texas has been a team that if you guard them, they have trouble because they just can't score much. So Cowboys have shown the propensity to play some defense at times. And so I think Cowboys have a shot. I don't know. Texas is playing for its life. It's clearly on the bubble. The Cowboys are trying to get to the bubble. Texas is on the bubble, so it's do or die for the Longhorns as well. So it ought to be at least interesting in Austin.
For sure. Nathan, Barry mentions that run, that 14-0 run, and much of that big opening to the half that we saw to the Cowboys was done without a guy that has been called an MVP by his coach, has played like the team MVP, that being Mitchell Solomon. How'd the Cowboys do what they did in really distancing themselves from the Red Raiders with Mitchell Solomon not a part of things?
that end actually came to the end with him picking up his fourth foul. So it's, very early in the second half, he's already got his fourth foul. Only played 3 minutes in the first half after getting 2 fouls in the span of 16 seconds of play. So obviously OSU was able to do it, only getting 13 minutes and 3 points from Solomon. Obviously the scoring, you never really expected to be there. But Kendall Smith and Mike Boynton after the game both made a point. We did it. He still made an impact. He still found a way to be involved. Mike Boynton said Mitchell Solomon owned my timeout tonight. He was a guy who was in there in the huddle saying, hey, this is what we need to do. This is what's important. This is what I want to see out of you guys out there. So he's not really a vocal guy, but he recognized that because he couldn't talk with his play, he was using his words to say, be a leader and provide in those moments. Kendall Smith said, whether he plays 2 minutes or 32 minutes, he's a huge player for us. And we know that when he is on the court, he's going to make winning plays. But other guys stepped up. Cam McGriff finishes with 9 and 7. Lindy Waters scored a career-high 18 points and didn't miss a shot from the field. And Kendall Smith added 21 as well. So he's a guy, Kendall Smith, who has now scored double digits in 9 straight games, a guy who's really coming to his own of late, and a guy who will be really important in this final stretch of the season.
Barry, when to hear Nathan mention those names of guys that were really impactful against Texas Tech, Jeffrey Carroll's still a guy that, we're not seeing have the big impacts that we thought he would have. This is something we've talked about repeatedly, but the fact that the Cowboys were able to keep their hopes alive with, guys like Kendall Smith, Lindy Waters, those sorts of guys doing what they did. Is that a positive in some small way that they found a way to win, that they moved the needle? And maybe there's still a chance for Jeffrey Carroll to really get going here the last 3 games of the season?
Yeah, the deeper we've gone into this season, the less top-heavy the OSU offense has been. Early in the year, we thought Jeffrey Carroll was an all-Big 12 type performer. The truth is he hasn't played like that, but Oklahoma State has supplemented and found ways to make it a fairly equitable system scoring-wise, and that's not a bad thing at all. Smith's been excellent, I think, in shouldering some of the scoring load. Lindy Waters had the big game last night. Cameron McGriff has played well, not necessarily last night, although he had a couple of moments, but he had a couple of those, those road wins in West Virginia and Kansas where he put the team on his shoulder. So it's become a pretty balanced team, and that's never a bad thing. That Carroll can still get hot. I think he had 2 3-pointers during the 14-0 run. Yeah, so he's still capable. But it's, to me, they're I don't know if they've maximized their potential, but they're certainly playing near what they're capable of. And you can't ask for much more if you're a coach, if you're a fan, if you're an analyst, whatever you are. You have to say Cowboys are actually getting a lot of mileage out of what they have.
Yeah, that's for sure. I had a sudden thought when you almost called him Fred McGriff, Barry. Should we borrow the nickname? Should we call Cam McGriff the Crime Dog?
The Crime Dog's fine with me.
Is there a chance we can make that stick? Nathan, are you on board with that?
I think that's actually been thrown around a lot, even since last year. Just the last name has kind of carried through. And going back to Jeffrey Carroll, I think in fairness to him, he finished with 14 points, had the 2 big threes, and he had a dunk, I think, that made it to number 2 on SportsCenter's top 10. So he's a guy that's still contributing, maybe not as much. I think his scoring average has dropped after every game. I don't think he's outscored his average recently. But as Barry was mentioning, this is a team that's found a way to be balanced. Lindy Waters steps up, Kendall Smith steps up. Jeff, started the year having to be the guy, and maybe that created a bit of pressure. But now he necessarily hasn't had to be. In any of those big 3 wins at Kansas, at West Virginia, and last night, he hasn't had to be the guy. And I think that's when OSU is at its best, when Jeffrey Carroll when you have multiple supplemental pieces to build a win around, and it's not just Jeffrey Carroll or Kendall Smith, one guy carrying the team.
Yeah, and Nathan, you mentioned right off the top the Cowboys' approach to things and the fact that they've approached these last 2 weeks as a 4-game season. They get that win in game 1 of the 4, but as near as we can tell, it doesn't look like that has moved the Cowboys any closer to the bubble. Still look like a team that even with these monumental top 10 wins, that they're still on the outside looking in. Is that what you're sensing, that this is still a must win the rest of these games to be an NCAA tournament type of team?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a team that coming into last night was arguably still fighting for a spot in the NIT. So now I think last night's win puts them in a position where they're very comfortable with that. But you're looking at a team that has 12 losses. It's hard to overcome that, even if you look at all of the big wins, even if it's a team that by the end of the year we could say swept Kansas. That's still a possibility with Kansas coming to GIA on March 3rd. But right now with 12 losses, 3-8, 3-5 in its last 8 games, 3-0 against ranked teams and 0-5 against unranked teams. So obviously OSU has the opportunity to kind of switch that these next 2 games, playing at Texas and at Iowa State, 2 unranked teams, to one team who's in a bubble and one team who's also near the bottom of the Big 12. So OSU has the opportunity to get a couple wins on the road and then end its season against Kansas. The opportunity is definitely still there, whether it's as an at-large team here or going into Kansas City. Mike Boynton has said this a couple times. The Big 12 might be the only league in America where any team could go into the conference tournament and win it, and you wouldn't necessarily be surprised. I don't think anyone would pick OSU to win or an Iowa State to win it, but if either of those teams won it, it wouldn't necessarily surprise anyone, just given the depth and the talent in this conference.
Yeah, it does seem pretty wide open with a variety of teams sort of showing their ability to beat other top teams this year in the Big 12. But Barry, as Nathan was talking about, where the Cowboys are, RPI still in the 90s, which at this point is not likely to get them in the NCAA tournament. Is this a scenario where by this time next week, if they could swap places with Texas and be in Texas's on the bubble spot, if that is indeed where the Longhorns are, would that give them the setup to potentially get there? Would that be sort of a intermediate step between here and maybe finding a way to get it into the NCAA tournament?
Oh, I guess so. The good news is, the committee no longer really uses RPI much. We use it in media and whatnot because it's an easy tool to find and an easy tool to just sort of get a general strength of a team's record. But the committee's de-emphasized RPI in recent years, and so I don't know that an RPI in the 70s would automatically get rid of OSU. But definitely, 8 and 10 in the league would have a shot. But if one of those is Kansas, it depends on which 2 you beat. I think if the Cowboys can beat Texas and Iowa State and lose to Kansas, that's probably not as strong of a case as if you sweep Kansas. So a lot of different things. And the other thing to always remember is when we say if OSU can get to 8 and 10 or 9 and 9, they're in. The truth of the matter is these decisions are not made in a vacuum. And there are other bubble teams in other conferences, multiple leagues, multiple teams that factor in as well. So if the Cowboys get in, it's going to be very tight. And for them to get in contention, they're going to have to win and just see where we're at. But definitely, starting with Texas, if you could get ahead of the food chain on Texas, that would help. But the committee doesn't really look at conference standings much. So don't think that if you beat Texas, you're automatically getting ahead of Texas. You might not.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, with so many other conference, automatic bids out there, there's always likely to be a conference where somebody that is, expected to win doesn't win that tournament, and suddenly there's a spot taken up by a team that wasn't going to get an at-large bid. So those are the type of things that until they happen, we just won't know how that factors into the Cowboys NCAA tournament hopes. But Nathan, a couple things before we get on out of here. You were at Gallagher-Iba, I mentioned earlier in the segment, for that Wednesday night game against Texas Tech. There weren't many of you, though, because with the weather, it was really hard for people to get there. Probably the smallest crowd of the season, but sounds like they might have had an impact on some things that happened on Wednesday night.
Yeah, Chris Beard, Mike Boynton, OSU's players, they all made a point of how impactful that crowd was. It was announced about just slightly over 7,000. It's probably in reality about half that, and just ticket sales didn't come through as people bought tickets and decided not to make the trek. But, it was a crowd that made an impact. It was a crowd that got loud. early in the first half, it was announced that OSU had canceled classes for Thursday, and that got the students really into it. Mike Boynton was a little upset at the time because it had happened while Cam McGriff was shooting a free throw. So it's strange to see the home crowd be kind of impact things that way. But once there's kind of an understanding of things, Boynton said, I was 19 once, I probably wouldn't be doing the same thing. But so they got into it then, and then once OSU starts going on that run, they really got into it. The whole crowd was energized really for the entirety of the second half. It was a stark difference from what we had seen during that 3-game home losing streak. But that also has to do with OSU's play. They haven't really given their crowd a big reason to get inspired. But throughout the game, throughout the second half, GIA was into it. It was rocking despite, not a great crowd size, definitely some icy conditions through and around Stillwater and throughout the state. But it didn't stop people. Mike Boynton had been saying, we need to play like we did at Kansas at West Virginia. We need to do that for our home fans. And OSU rewarded those fans who made the trip, ended up storming the court. And so it was definitely a good sign going forward heading into that Kansas game. I think Kansas, no matter the weather, would draw a good crowd. Probably would draw plenty of Kansas fans as well for that game, especially depending on how the Big 12 standings sort out at that point. But yeah, so it was good to see the crowd get into it. Everyone kind of gave credit to that crowd, to the people who made the trip. So it sets up well, I think. It shows that work is being done. It shows that Mike Boynton is building, that regardless of how this season ends, whether it gets an NCAA tournament bid or not, that there is excitement brewing in Stillwater for this team.
Barry, unfortunately for Oklahoma State, they've had some bad circumstances with games. I mean, just here recently, obviously the weather on Wednesday night, a week ago Wednesday, Oklahoma State has an early tip, a 6 o'clock tip, and it just happens to be Valentine's Day. So just some untimely situations that played into crowd size, I think. And Nathan's right. There's sort of been a sense that things are headed the right way, but how does this all play together in your mind? They haven't gotten the crowds. Probably we aren't going to see a huge uptick in numbers on the average for Oklahoma State, but Mike Boynton has got some of these marquee wins in his first season as head coach. Where do you sort of put the state of the Oklahoma State basketball program right now?
Well, I mean, I think there's some strange things have happened, but the truth is, this team has played, in a lot of ways, it's played as well on the road as it has at home. Last night was a notable exception, but I got into it with a reader on my chat earlier, who sort of mocked the fact that I said the Gallagher-Iba mystique is gone. Well, it's gone. It's not coming back anytime soon. They've lost 5 home games this year. They played well last night, but the truth is there was no reason to be pessimistic about this Cowboy team going on the road. They have proven to be as good a road team as they are a home team. So, and last night we saw them pull out a nice home win in front of the smallest crowd at Gallagher in perhaps 25 years. So it's a case of, this Cowboy team is sort of winning on its own. It's not being lifted by the wave of Gallagher-Iba. Maybe that'll return soon, but it's not prevalent now. And this team has proven that it can go up against on the road and play well. Could have won at Lubbock last time. They beat Tech last night. They had a 15-point lead in Lubbock and lost by 5. They won at West Virginia. They won at Kansas. They lost by 1 at Arkansas. So this team has proven that it can play well on the road, and that's what it needs to do in these next 2 games.
Okay, Nathan, before we get out of here, analyze Saturday going to Texas. What is the biggest key in your mind if the Cowboys are to continue their winning ways on the road, and what they even say is a must-win game? What has to happen in your mind?
Yeah, I think Lindy Waters really simplified it after the game yesterday. OSU is at its best when it defends, rebounds, and runs. And it was able to do that last night. It led to a bunch of transition points. OSU outscored Texas Tech 20-2 on fast break points, set a season high in fast break points. If OSU is able to create those opportunities, play well on the defensive end, rebound it, and then set that up on the offensive end, I think it'll go a long way to beating the Longhorns.
All right, we'll see how it goes on Saturday. It seems to be an adventure for this OSU basketball team regardless. So we'll be paying attention, see what happens then. Again, they've narrowed it down, 4-game season. They win out. They feel like they're in a pretty good space for the NCAA tournament. We'll see. Starts again on Saturday at Austin. So be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.